Hey folks, Quillyteen here, and with the release of Baldur's Gate 3 finally here, I want to make a video talking about my thoughts specifically about the Druid class, because I believe I'm going to be playing a Druid on my live stream campaign, which theoretically is literally happening right now at twitch.tv/Quillyteen when this video goes live. And I've got quite a few thoughts about how you can build a Druid, and I think there's a lot of different options. Let's go and take a look at the class right away, first of all. So, as the game says, Druids channel the element, the force of nature, and share deep kinship with animals. Mastery of wild shape allows them to transform into beasts from all over the realm. You will be able to pick a specialization later on that basically makes you either more spellcasting focused or more shape-shifting focused. So right away, we get a mix of gameplay that presents itself. We look at the details over here. You can see we encounter, these are classic Dungeons & Dragons Druid weapons. For whatever reason, this is the series of weapons that are put in here. Some of them make sense. I mean, sickles are just, actually like farming implements and things like that. I don't know why scimitars are classically associated with druids in D&D, but they are. There we have it. Now, armor-wise, you also get to wear light armor and medium armor. In old school D&D, the armor wasn't categorized the same way, but druids basically weren't allowed to wear anything that was made out of metal, which was an interesting restriction. So here we have a few options. Now, one of the big things with the druid is if you shapeshift, while you're shapeshifted, while you're in animal form, your 3 physical stats here are replaced with your animal form's attributes, which means in theory, these 3 stats don't matter the same way for a druid. Now, you're not always going to be in an animal form, so obviously that doesn't necessarily ring true, but it kind of does. Now, the most important stat as a druid, of course, is wisdom. It is highlighted over here. The reason it's the primary attribute is because it is our spell casting attribute, and it's definitely the one that's going to be most important to us. Right here, this represents the maximum number of points because the most points you can assign to an ability or an attribute or a stat in 5th edition D&D, or Baldur's Gate, I should say here, is a 15. We cannot go above a 15 here, but we can, of course, add up to a +2 to this stat. Now, only even-numbered abilities give you a bonus, give you an advantage, right? So if you have a value of 10, you add nothing to your die roll. A 12 is a +1. A 14 is a +2, and a 16 is a +3. If you get up to 18, it's a +4, and finally 20, a +5 is generally the most that you're allowed to do in 5th edition rules of D&D. So maxing it out at 17 doesn't really give you anything by itself. However, and at this point, I'm not 100% sure what the final list of feats will be. There are, so every 4 levels, you get to choose a feat for your character. Rather than choose a feat, you can add a total of +2 to your stats. You can put +2 in a single stat, or you can split the pluses into +1 for 2 different stats. Additionally, some of the feats you choose do also give you +1 to a stat. If there is a good feat that is available, and again, that information is not quite available currently to me, then that gives you +1 to a wisdom, then starting with 17 might be quite good, because then you can grab that feat that gives you another +1 to bring you into 18, again, hit that even number, while still getting the benefit for some feat. However, I think it's very likely, a lot of characters will often just take flat out +2 to a stat, at least, maybe the first time, maybe a second time, to get up to 20. So 16 might be plenty good. And at the start of the game, certainly this will give you all the bonuses that you want. The question then is, what do you do with everything else? Because honestly, as a druid, this is kind of sort of the only thing you need to do. Now, let's talk about physical attributes for a bit. You can, certainly, if you want, play a melee-oriented druid. Certainly that is possible. I'm not sure that even then, strength is necessarily desirable. And part of the reason for that is that we do, as a druid, have access to the Shillelagh attribute, or Shillelagh cantrip over here. This transforms your staff or club into a magical weapon, increasing its damage, and most importantly, perhaps, is allows you to use your spell casting ability for attack rolls. That means we would use our wisdom for attack rolls as opposed to strength, which means even if you were planning to play a melee-oriented druid, you could potentially dump strength. On the other hand, if you do have the points in strength, then you could consider foregoing the use of Shillelagh and just doing other things with your character. I'm pretty sure I will dump strength and only leave it at 8. That's perfectly fine. Now, dexterity is interesting. Again, this is another stat that while you're in animal form, you will be using your animal form's dexterity. But Unlike strength, I think dexterity is something you're still probably going to want for your character as is. First of all, your dexterity does factor into your armor class. Unless you're wearing heavy armor doesn't use your dexterity at all. But if you're wearing no armor, light armor, or medium armor, your dexterity does matter. Although with the medium armor, it is limited to a +2 bonus. So if you had a dexterity of 16 and had a +3 modifier from dexterity, and you're wearing heavy armor, you wouldn't get full benefit to your AC, although it would still affect your reflex score and, of course, any skills that use dexterity as well. So dexterity makes you harder to hit. It also improves your dexterity saving throw, which is something that comes up fairly often. Things like fireballs, for example, use a dexterity saving throw to try to get half damage, so it's quite good. So one thing you could consider with your dexterity is you could consider bringing it all the way up to 14. This gives you a +2 modifier, which means when you're standing around in your caster form like this, and you've got your medium armor on, which is the heaviest armor that you can wear as a druid, or the heaviest armor that you're proficient in as a druid, then you can be quite pleased with the maximum AC bonus. I will make a note over here. There's an interesting possibility. If you go something like, say, the Shield Dwarf over here. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong about that. Never mind. I thought the Shield Dwarf gave you heavy armor proficiency, so ignore me. The Shield Dwarf is actually quite cool that it gives you light and medium armor. If you're playing a class that doesn't give you any armor proficiency, like, say, a wizard, a Shield Dwarf wizard can all of a sudden wear some armor, which is pretty cool. So yeah, unless you can get a proficiency for heavy army proficiency. I don't know if that's necessarily the winning move as a druid, but it's certainly possible. So you could decide to invest up to a 14. I probably wouldn't sit at an 8 because then you would be getting a penalty AC as well as a really bad dexterity saving throw. I'd feel pretty bad about this. I think a 10 is probably fine, a 12 is probably fine, and a 14 is probably fine. Let's talk about Constitution. So this is another attribute that does get replaced when you are shifted into animal form. So if you're going to be spending a lot of time in animal form, maybe you don't need that much Constitution. However, most D&D players have this like absolute need to get a good Constitution. And the big thing is, I mean, yeah, there are saving throws. Certainly, concentration checks require a decent Constitution or benefit from a decent Constitution. But the big thing with Constitution is extra hit points per level, which generally makes a good Constitution very desirable for every character. And again, you could certainly consider going to a 14 over here. And you don't want to put your +1 attribute. Obviously, your +2 is going to go into Wisdom. Well, I mean, in a sense, it doesn't matter because you can still reach a 16 with the +1 or the +2, but you'll probably put +2 in Wisdom, and you want to put the +1 in these two because it saves extra points, right? To go from a 13 to a 14 costs you 2 ability points. See that? We're at 10, and we go to 8. Whereas if you have a +1 modifier here, then going from a 13 to a 14 just costs you the 1 point instead. So you'll want to clearly put your +1 over here because it does give you a few more points to spin around. Then you've got 8 points left over here, and you get to choose what's next. Personally, when I play a role-playing game like this, I really like it when my character is can act as the face of the party, right? Can be the person who's doing social things, and therefore I generally like to, if I'm going to be having a conversation, I would like to have the +2 charisma for those benefits. In particular, I was thinking with my druid that for my background, I might take Guild Artisan here, because it does give us proficiency in persuasion, which is not something druids normally gain access to. You do have the ability to pick insight naturally as a druid, but you don't have the ability to get persuasion. And then all of a sudden, if I do this, then if I look at my skills over here, right, I've got a persuasion of +4, which ain't too shabby. And then we got the insight. Again, as a druid, we could put a point in there, but I don't have to. And then for other than that, I mean, knowledge of nature is pretty good. This is sort of like a book smart nature. This is, you know, you have studied biology and botany and those sorts of things, as opposed to, say, animal handling and survival, which is based on wisdom as opposed to intelligence, which means you're very likely to have very good numbers in these because you're going to want to be pumping your wisdom fairly high up. So, and it still kind of fits, you know, stay in the wild, alive in the wild, track, prey, animal handling here. So this is more like self-taught. I can actually live in the wild rather than write a dissertation about, you know, how different plants pollinate or something. However, so, you know, this is one way that I can look at it, and we have a point left over. Going from 8 and 9 doesn't really shift anything, but just flavor-wise, we'll probably put in intelligence, so I don't feel quite as dumb, even though I'm still going to have a -1 to all my intelligence rolls. So this is one way to do it. Another way of doing it, though, is I like the idea of playing a wise old druid, someone with the, you know, the knowledge and longevity of an oak tree. And for something like that, I would actually consider, what if we brought our dexterity and our constitution down to 12 each over here? And if I do that, putting the +1 in here doesn't actually save us any points. But what this does is it frees up enough points to do this with intelligence. So we're going to have one less armor class and one less dexterity saving throw. But again, whenever I'm in animal form, that doesn't really matter so much. I will have 1 hit point less per level, but again, in animal form, I will use the hit points of the actual animal form. By the way, if you don't know, when Druid shapeshifts, right, they get the hit points of the animal form they're in. When those hit points reach 0, they just pop out of their animal form and back into humanoid form. So Druids kind of have double health bars, which is kind of OP and awesome. So this is all of a sudden very interesting because dexterity and constitution wasn't contributing to any skills we were looking at. Although again, concentration checks do look at your constitution. As far as I know, you know what? Entirely possible I'm misspeaking here, but I'm pretty certain that when you get damaged and you're maintaining a concentration spell, like for example, no, that's actually permanent. There we go. So fog cloud is concentration. Actually, quite a few of these are concentration, right? And so you have to do a check to see if you lose concentration on your spell. So there's some benefit there. But, you know, we could sacrifice a little bit of this to all of a sudden give us a bunch of intelligence. Now, all of a sudden, our character skill options are a lot more interesting in that our knowledge skills, like nature and religion and arcana, all of a sudden can be quite a bit better. And you can, if you want to really lean into the wise old druid type figure, which I kind of like the vibe of, you could go ahead with Sage. Now remember, not only do these backgrounds affect what skill proficiencies you gain, but they also generate how you gain inspiration in game. Inspiration lets you do rerolls in like social situations and things like that, right? You're trying to persuade someone and you fail your roll, you can use inspiration to roll again, which is really nice. And taking the actions that are associated to your background will help you gain that. And so here you can see learning about rare lore of the world will inspire you to put this knowledge to greater purpose. So this, I mean, if you're the sort of person who's really going to be delving deep on learning information, finding rare books, things like that, being a sage might increase the chance of generating inspiration. Although I will say with the Guild Artisan, repairing and discovering rare crafts will bring you inspiration. If you like crafting in games, you should pick Guild Artisan, because if you're going to be focusing on that, presumably it will generate more inspiration points. But if you do get Sage, you get your skill in Arcana and History, and then on for your Druid points, you could go and spend Nature and Religion and pick up like all the knowledge skills on your Druid character over here, which is a little weird because Intelligence is not one of your primary attributes, and yet this kind of feels good for a main character who wants to know everything. If you want to, you know, there's lots of interactions in Baldur's Gate where, you know, you're seeing something or reading a plaque and it makes a history check for you to see if you can get extra insight. You'll find a shrine to some, you know, old god, and you'll do a religion check to get more insight. If you're the sort of person who really wants to get the maximum information out of the game, maximum lore, if you as a player or consider yourself a bit of a sage, then this will guarantee that you have the best chance to get as many rolls of these as possible. Obviously, some of these skills will also be covered by your companions, and so in some of these cases it might feel a little bit redundant, although depending on the situation, it might just mean you'll have multiple good rolls between you and your companion, right? If you're playing with a certain wizard companion, they'll have Arcana. If you're playing with a certain cleric companion, they'll have Religion, for example. In fact, some of them might double up. I can't remember. Shadow Heart might have Religion and History. Maybe that's Gale has Arcana and History. You know, there's that kind of stuff. But this kind of vibes with me, especially with the persona that I'm looking for my character, which is definitely going to be, I'm going to be playing an elf druid. Now, here's the thing. In the early access version of the game, the Wood Elf, I believe, gave you not only the greater speed, but also had good stats, because it was like +2 dexterity, +1 wisdom, which was very compatible with building a druid. Now, of course, you just get to choose your choose your own values. And so that's the thing with the old Wood Elf, with the +1 dexterity, I definitely wanted to go to 14 dexterity to get maximum value out of that +1. But now with these flexible assignment bonuses, there's certainly more options and flexibility. But yeah, I think the old Wood Elf came with a automatic proficiency in stealth, which incentivized me that much more to go with the higher possible dex of 14, because then we could stealth quite good. Now the Wood Elf doesn't really come with that. It's got the increased movement speed. And here's the thing. while thematically to me, the Wood Elf really makes the most sense with a Druid, I'm not entirely excited by Fleet of Foot over here. I am for non-Druids, because for melee people who aren't Druids, this extra movement speed is really nice. But presumably in combat, I'm going to be using my animal forms, and the animal forms, I believe, have their own movement speed built in, which overrides this. So I'm not sure it's got as much value. So even though the high elves aren't quite as naturey, I'm personally thinking for my Druid, yeah, and I still want to go elf for my Druid, just because. I mean, first of all, the base elven stuff, yeah, it gives you more weapon training with may or may not batter. It comes with dark vision. It's got improved saving throws. And to me, I mean, actually, I'm not sure that elf is an optimal pick anymore for a druid, but I personally always like the flavor of it, so I'll probably do that. I think there may be stronger, more min-maxy little things that you can do. I mean, certainly you could consider even going drow over here. Again, not for the weapon proficiency so much, but for the superior dark vision is really good. The saving throw here is nice. Or the half-elf with the drow variant that does give you the dancing light cantrip, which is quite cool. Now, as a high elf, you do get to pick a cantrip of your choice. It does default to firebolt, right? It might be a little confusing, right? You pick high elf, you see this firebolt over here. You can change this by clicking here, and then you can pick something else. Like, for example, maybe you want mage hand for some, some flexibility of being able to interact with the world at range. Especially if you kind of know or don't know, are you going to have a wizard in a party or what? There is respecking in the game. I haven't experienced it yet, but apparently you do get to a point where you can basically change just about everything about your character if you're unhappy with it. Larian did the same thing with their... would Divinity Original Sin 2 be their most recent game before Baldur's Gate? I think so, but if they did put one out in between, then I apologize. Divinity Original Sin 2 is an excellent game, and in it you'll see a lot of the game engine that is in Baldur's Gate 3 was there. I think, yeah, DOS 2 is fantastic and does have full free respecking whenever you want, which is very convenient. So, there's a lot of really interesting these wizard cantrips that you can take. There's a lot of really neat stuff, but personally, I'd be tempted to take Mage Hand. Mostly, I think, as a old school D&D tabletop player, the utility of stuff like Mage Hand and the stuff you could do with it was always huge. Minor Illusion actually is also super useful in a tabletop setting. In terms of spell selection for the Druid, I really think for the actual Druid cantrips, I think you probably want, you definitely want someone with guidance, because you want to be able to give a D4 bonus to ability checks. This comes up all the time in conversations and things like that. Your cleric in your party will also have the ability to do that. So you kind of want one or the other to be packing guidance as a possibility. And then other than that, I probably want one of these damage spells. I think probably I like the Thorn Whip just because it is a range attack. It's not super long range because 9 meters isn't super long, and it does bring an enemy closer to you, which may or may not be desirable all the time. But I do like the flexibility of this personally. However, if we do go elf, we do have the longbow proficiency, longbow and shortbow. Of course, these will use your dexterity though, so if you're going to be using that, you might want to go with the version of the druid that has the 14 dexterity and then do both things. Just from a flavor point of view, I don't see myself as a druid with the bows though, which is why I'm seriously thinking that elf, the way I want to play a druid, the elf isn't the most min-maxy race there is. But I'm playing a druid with a certain role-playing and theme and vibe idea, and which the elf is. So I'm in this torn area, right? There's a part of me who wants to min-max and optimize, and there's part of me who wants to roleplay. And it used to, I feel like in the early access version, for me the wood elf hit perfectly on both counts. Now all of a sudden I'm like, boy, there's so much better stuff we can do. I mean, halfling's always good. Right? One of the penalties of being a halfling is you move a little slower. Well, that's not going to matter in animal form. The lucky, right, rerolling on a 1 is always going to be amazing. The brave here, advantage against being frightened, is cool. And then of the sub races here, right, Lightfoot Halfling gives you the advantage on stealth checks, so we still wouldn't have proficiency on stealth, but we'd have advantage. Or you go Strongheart over here and gain advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. So now all of a sudden we're quite a bit tougher. And, you know, the halflings are fun and adorable. I can't remember... Yeah, so we can get the Dwarven Resilience here with the Dwarf as well. You get more hit points with the Gold Dwarf. The Durgard has the superior Dark Vision, which is really good. And then, yeah, more advantage on saving throws. So those are always good to do. I don't think the human matters as much for the Druid. It does give you weapon proficiency with pole arms, which actually could be quite cool and maybe thematically doesn't feel as bad to me. And it does give you an extra skill plus carrying capacity. And extra skills are always really nice to have. But yeah, there's so many things. I mean, the tiefling that gives you thaumaturgy is fantastic if you want to be doing intimidation checks, right? This is a real tiefling I really like. I think I like that a lot more than the mage hand, although again, if I was playing a high elf, I would probably take mage hand. That's because thaumaturgy is not an option. Asmodeus tiefling does get produce flame. So yeah, the Zuriel tiefling with thaumaturgy here, I like it so much for the advantage on intimidation checks. If you're going to do that, and maybe, you know, you're not going to be playing someone who's trying to intimidate people all the time, so it's a little bit moot. You know, the half-orc, again, we get the Dark Vision, which is always valuable. The Relentless Endurance is interesting, although we're already going to have double health bars as a Druid, so I'm not sure that's as important. The extra critical hit. Now, this is with a melee weapon attack. I'm assuming that natural weapons of our shapeshifted forms in-game count as melee weapon attacks, right? If you're, like, mauling someone as a bear, but it's possible it doesn't, and so that might be a little bit wasted, but I suspect that it works. The Dragonborn might not be as important here. I mean, we do get a breath weapon, but, you know, we've got other things. We've got some spells and whatnot. I'm not sure you can use the breath weapon in shapeshifted form, so to me, the Dragonborn Druid probably is a little less relevant. Lots of saving throws bonuses from Gnome Cunning, which is always going to be beautiful and brilliant. Yeah, double proficiency bonus on history checks. Now, is that even if we're not proficient in history? That's interesting. That is very interesting. So we get double that. So we get free proficiency twice with the Rock Gnome, which is really nice. Force Gnome, a little bit redundant because we already have access to Speak with Animals, although it means we can memorize or prepare some other spell instead. That's always an option. And then Deep Gnome does have the superior Dark Vision and advantage on stealth checks, which is pretty cool. The story of a Deep Gnome Druid is quite cool. There's not like, I think some of the splat books, I don't know about 5e, but on previous versions of D&D, there was certainly some Druid variant that was probably some Underdark Druid kind of thing that was all about, like, dealing with fungi as opposed to trees. And so one could assume a similar sort of story maybe with the Deep Gnomes. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities here. And again, I feel like at this point, elves are not min-maxed for it, but it does feel like it makes so much sense. I mean, I think, you know what the problem is for me? Is I feel like if I take the elf, I'll be wasting elven weapon training because I don't see myself using these. Although, it probably does make sense to pack a longbow early in the game because we don't get a shifting right away. And if I'm dumping a lot of my physical stats, I'm going to want to hit people probably with the bow. Like, let's assume I go, let's say Guild Artisan, so I can, because I'm basing myself with the face of the party, and I don't go the intelligence route. Instead, I go ahead with the, I go ahead with the 14 dexterity, 14 constitution route. Well, the 14 dexterity will make it pretty decent to use a bow, in which case I will probably use a bow to start off with. Now, anyway, you can see, we're just always looked at here as one class, and we can see there's a lot of different, and this is just level 1. Like, the amount of stuff your character is going to go through over the course of the game is going to be substantial in terms of customization. But even as level 1 here, you can set a very different kind of vibe and route and style of gameplay, which is great. And again, I'm probably going to take advantage of those the respecking when we gain access to that, because I'm the sort of person who wants to constantly tweak their build and try different things and see how I feel about it. Anyway, I meant this to be like a 10-minute long video, but here we are 24.5 minutes in. On one class, I love this game. It's going to be fantastic. Thanks for watching. And if you're watching this on August the 3rd, then head over to twitch.tv/Quill18 because we're going to be streaming Baldur's Gate 3, presumably as a druid, although I'm still considering I might play a paladin. You know what? I should go and record a paladin video right now so I can get all my thoughts out. We'll see. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.